you, Suzanne. Well, as Suzanne said at the beginning, it's very cold today. One of the comrades was telling me from Leicester it was -14 in Leicester last night. It's about -5 in the hall at the present time. I at least have the advantage. I can stand up here and wave my arms about to keep warm. You have to sit and listen to what I have to say. But hopefully it will warm you because of the perspectives that are opening up for the workers' movement internationally. Now, as Suzanne said, we had an international executive committee of the Committee for a Workers' International in Belgium about a month ago. The Socialist Party is affiliated to the Committee for a Workers' International. And there's a very good reason for that, because socialism is international or it is nothing. The ruling classes of the world get together and discuss the general situation, the viability of their system, what needs to be done, and so on. They met, as it happens, by coincidence, in Davos, in the mountain resort of Davos, a ski resort, much more comfortable circumstances than what we had in Belgium, with bad food and so on, and they were discussing the perspectives for their system. And the Financial Times concluded, in relation to this meeting at Davos, they said there was pessimism that was hanging in the mountain air. No amount of skiing, of jollification, was able to cheer them up. And that's because of the difficulties that their system is in. At our meeting, on the contrary, and we have sections of the CWI in every continent in the world, with the exception of Antarctica, as I've said there before, and there's not many people there to be won to our ideas. We have in Europe, in practically every country, sections of the CWI at the present time. And the mood at that meeting was extremely positive, was enthusiastic, because of the problems of capitalism worldwide and the resistance of working people to the imposition of cuts and so on the living standards of working people. Now, if you read some of the press in the last couple of days, you would see that in relation to capitalism, paradoxically, some of the representatives of this system actually say, well, it's the only viable system for humankind. This is what Nigel Lawson, who's a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, a Tory Chancellor of the Exchequer, said. Capitalism works, and it works far better than any other system because the discipline of the marketplace keeps greed, folly, and incompetence in check. This is against the background of the bonuses, that the obscene bonuses that we've seen as being paid to bankers and big business in the last couple of days. But does the system work? We have to ask a question here. According to their institutions of the International Labour Organization, there are 29 million people in the world today who actually have not got a job. That's not the total. Who would have a job if it was before this crisis began. So 29 million people are out of work, a big percentage of them young people, because this system has broken down. There are 200 million unemployed in the world at the present time. And that doesn't take account of what the capitalists now call the precariat. That's people on short-term jobs, people who have a short-term contract, and of a hand-to-mouth existence at the present time. They also estimate it will take 600 million new jobs in order to satisfy the demands of the population growth and so on. And there is no prospect of that being reached on the basis of the capitalist system itself. In fact, the picture that exists today in relation to Europe, which is one of the most advanced sections of capitalism worldwide, is if you look at Germany, if you look at Spain, for instance, we have what we can only describe as a jobs famine. In Spain, there's 23% of the population who are unemployed. That's a total of 5 million people. That, in other words, that's not just a slowdown. That is a repeat of the 1930s depression, which exists in the heart of Europe at the present time. If you count young people, 51% of young people are unemployed in Spain at the present time. That's not just a statistic, that is a crime. When you have the majority of young people who are outside the factory gates, who cannot even have a minimal job, then that system is a system that is sick until death. In Greece, we see the enormous upheavals in Greece in the last couple of weeks, and particularly yesterday, in the streets of Athens, the clashes that took place. If you look at Greece, you can only describe that position as a slump. EU unemployment is something like 10%, and now it's got a tendency to become permanent. In other words, it's not conjunctural, it's not episodic. This is as best as it's likely to get, apart from a small ups and downs in the figures as far as capitalism is concerned. We have even the right-wing, almost semi-fascist, you could say, right-wing party in Greece, whose ministers walked out of the government yesterday. 6 of their ministers walked out of the government and said to the EU, we cannot accept this medicine anymore. We've had 15 years of stagnation. We've had 5 years of continual cuts. We're down to the bones. Even the police, by the way, came out on strike in Greece yesterday. And they threatened to arrest the Troika, that's the IMF, the ECB and so on, for imposing the cuts on the Greek people. And as a result of this, we have the leader of the right party, Laos. It's not the only right party. There's New Democracy, and then there's Laos, which was once, at one stage, a kind of neo-fascist organisation. It's moved slightly to the centre, and this is what even a neo-fascist says. I will not contribute to the breakout of a revolution by the new poor that will consume the whole of Europe. That's a very significant statement about the situation that is opening up in Greece at this particular moment in time. And there is a big difference, it's true, between what the European Commission calls the periphery. That is Portugal, Ireland, the so-called pigs, Italy and so on. Southern Europe, in which now we must include Ireland as well. What we have is a two-speed Europe at the present time. But forget the bromide, forget the rather comforting expressions of that everything is for the best, in the best of all possible worlds, which was given by the spokesman of capitalism in the aftermath of Davos, and listen to Donald Sung, chief executive of the Hong Kong administration. He said after this meeting, I have never been as scared as I am now. That's a very sober statement, but it's a reality of the way that the capitalists are viewing the situation in the whole of the world at the present time. Europe, of course, is at the epicenter of this movement. There's no growth this year. In fact, the European Commission expects there will be a drop of 0.5% in the course of the year itself. And it will be a lot worse, by the way, but for the fact that the European Central Bank, that's the overall bank for Europe, if it hadn't have stepped in and propped up the ailing banking system in Europe at the present time. They're still not out of the woods yet. Capitalism has still not solved the problem. Greece, we could say virtually with certainty, will default. They're now trying to patch it up and expect that it might be delayed for a period of the next 2 or 3 months. That's not at all certain because of the way that the situation is developing now. The programme that they have prescribed for the Greek people can only be compared to the position that existed in Greece during the war. Now, I visited Greece in 1974 when the colonels were overthrown. There was a revolutionary movement in Greece at that stage. It was impossible to go into a taverna without the singing of revolutionary songs. The film Z was shown in all the cinemas. Most of the young people here don't know about this film. But this is about the assassination of a Greek deputy, Lambrakis, in the northern part of Greece. that showed up the character of the Greek state, showed up the character of the neo-fascist regime. Every cinema in Athens was showing this particular film. But the position then, in 1974, was a paradise compared to the position now. The position that we have now is comparable to what the Greek people faced during the Second World War. And that is why, for instance, there's an anti-German feeling in Greece. It's not a good thing. There's an element of nationalism there, but if you look at what happened over the period of the Christmas itself, we have, because of the cutbacks that have taken place, we have young children, babies who've been left on the streets, who've been left outside orphanages with a note saying, we cannot feed our own children. There's nowhere in Europe that's got this position at the present time. Yet, the cutbacks, if they're carried through, will only reduce the debt of Greece to 130 billion, which is what it is in Italy at the present time, which is the reason why the ECB is demanding that a cut take place in Italy in the living standards of the working class. The IEC discussions was not just a discussion and a commentary on what needs to take place, or what is likely to take place. It was also a forum where the parties of the CWI discussed what we could do in this situation. What would be the correct tactic? What would be the correct demands? What would be the slogans that we could raise that would touch the majority of the working people in Greece at this stage? And in particular, a demand for an IEC, for a referendum on the question of the euro. Now there's a slight problem here. In Britain, which is a population of 65 million, it's a big country, the idea of a referendum on the euro, 70% of the population support that at the present time. But in Ireland and Greece, that were poor countries, before they entered the euro, there's a memory of that in the consciousness of the population of Ireland and Greece. In other words, being members of the euro is associated with prosperity. And despite the agonies they're going through at the present time, there is a reluctance for the majority of the populations in both of those states to come out of the euro. But frankly, the euro is actually an iron corset on the living standards. It's gone from being a positive into an enormous negative now. And we have to pose the question of opposition to the euro, not from a nationalist point of view, not from the point of view that is put forward, for instance, by Theodorakis, who's a very famous folk singer in Greece, just opposition to the euro and to come out. In or out of the EU, or in and out of the euro, the working people of Greece will still suffer cutbacks. You only have to look at Argentina 20 years ago to see that coming out of the dollar peg resulted in a drop in the living standards of the working people of Argentina. So on the basis of capitalism, in or out is not an alternative. But we have to pose it from a socialist point of view. We have to pose it and say, we oppose the euro. In fact, 6 of our parties in Europe at the present time have made a declaration in relation to this. We oppose the euro. We say, come out of the EU, but don't remain there. Cancel the debt, which will never be paid off, by the way. Nationalise the banks as a step towards the taking over of industry in these countries. Now, these are small countries, but nevertheless, that could be a springboard for an appeal to the working class of the whole of Europe. Even now, by the way, we have to raise in the trade union movement in Britain, in the next week or so, solidarity with the Greek people in relation to what is happening at the moment. We don't know how far it's going to go. We look at that when we discuss it in the course of the discussion itself. We oppose the EU, but we don't go for a narrow nationalist point of view. Socialism is international, I repeat, or it's nothing. There's no such a thing as autarky or socialism in one country. One little country by itself will not be able to stand against the conspiracy of big business. So any action we take in a national framework has to be related to the struggles of the working class internationally. Well, what about sovereignty? Well, on the basis of capitalism, You're not sovereign. You're subject to the pressures of world capitalism. You cannot remain in isolation. We have to go towards an international solution, I would propose. Does that mean that we cannot raise the question of sovereignty in relation to a country? Well, actually, Leon Trotsky made the point that the working class is really the champion of the nation. In Britain, it's the majority of the population. We oppose bourgeois nationalism, which tends to split worker against worker, black against white, men against women. We're opposed to the policies of the violent rule of the ruling class. But nevertheless, there are occasions, for instance now in Italy, where the ECB is trying to interfere. I'll mention that a little bit later on. It is necessary for us to raise the working class leading, the trade union and labour movement leading the struggle, if you like, being the champion of the nation as a whole. The question that we have to pose in this meeting today, amongst the newest, the freshest, the more open sections of the population, who, in my opinion, have most to gain and most to lose in this situation, because of the situation of world and of British capitalism, we have to pose the question, where is growth going to come from? This is the question that is in the minds of the ruling class, of the spokesman of the ruling class, but it's also a question that must be in the minds of young people and of working people in general. Where is the possibility of a certain period of growth? And I have to say this, we would favour, that's the socialists, our party would favour, if it was possible, a certain growth. Because in the course of the growth in the economy, workers would be taken back into the factories, young people would be given a stake in society, they would gain more confidence, and in that way it could prepare a new offensive of the working class. When you have a slump, that doesn't automatically mean a radicalisation, certainly from an industrial point of view. Politically, it's a different question. So we would favour a period of growth, but we have to be asked very soberly and very clearly here, where will this growth come from? If you look at the capitalists themselves, I'm going to speak at a debate at the Oxford Union on Thursday. 4 on my side and 4 on their side. Actually, it's 7 against 1. I have 10 minutes to make the case that capitalism has failed the poor. But one of the points I'm going to make in this discussion, and it's all members of the CBI and it's all the MP and all of that, so you're speaking to the wall in effect, but you will try and convince some of the students who are there. But one of the points I'm going to make is your system, capitalism, is viable, is only viable on the basis that it takes society forward, that it's able to develop the means of production, science, the organisation of labour and of technique. And in a certain sense, if you look at Karl Marx, he said that capitalism is a revolutionary system in a way. It's broken with feudalism and it's developed the productive forces. It's made possible for the first time in history for want and privation to be abolished from the planet. But because it's based upon private property, because it's a system that's based upon production for profit and not for need, it comes up against its own limitations. And that is shown very starkly today. If you are confident in your system, if you say that this system is the most viable, why is it then that in the vaults of the big companies in the US, there's $2 trillion in the vaults of those companies? In Britain, there's 130 billion pounds that's lying idle in the banks. The capitalists are not investing. The big companies would rather speculate on the stock exchange than invest in industry and invest in jobs. And why is this the case? They're even prepared, by the way, to soak the money away in Switzerland, even though they take a loss, because their money is safe in Switzerland. It's not safe anywhere else in Europe at the present time. If this is the kind of system that we have, why is that the case? Why is it that we have a zombie capitalism now, where the banks don't lend, the capitalists don't spend, the borrowers don't borrow, and so on? We have what economists now call the Japaneseization. See, I got it out. The Japaneseization of Britain. And that's referring to the fact that Japan has actually been frozen, has been stuck, if you like, in a rut, for something like 2 decades now. That is the perspective that opens up on the basis of capitalism itself. Why is this the case? This is a central point, which I hope that the younger comrades in particular will discuss, and will ponder and try and come to terms with it. Why is it, for instance, that in Britain we have this mad policy of the privatisation of the NHS? Even the Tories now are aware that it doesn't work. The privatisation doesn't work. And yet internationally, we have to say that the capitalists are engaged in this mad policy of privatisation. As the Greeks would say, those who the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. There's a certain madness, if you like, in this policy. But why is it so? The reason for that is because 30 years ago, and it's reflected in Britain in particular, the ruling class was faced with a dilemma. Profitability dropped, productive industry didn't allow an outlet, so they invested in finance capital, and what I would call financialization. They invested abroad in China, behind the former Iron Curtain and so on, anywhere except investment in industry itself. And now the house of cards, which is being built on debt, which is being built on what Marx called fictitious capital, that's now come to a driving halt, as we said. Read our articles in Socialism Today. Read what we said in the Socialist, that this crisis would develop in the way that it has. And therefore you have this huge amount of liquidity, what the capitalists call liquidity that's in the banks of the big companies, and there's nowhere to invest it, except in this mad program of privatisation itself. And that's particularly shown in Britain, with the collapse of industry, with the deindustrialisation that is taking place and so on. There is no profitable outlet for the capitalists at this stage apart from loot the state, and hopefully some kind of market will be created in that situation itself. Now, at the beginning of 2011, there was hope that maybe they were over the worst. Now you see that the unemployment figures I've given and the general position of world capitalism, there is no way forward. Can the US provide a locomotive for the development of world capitalism? Well, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a certain growth in the US in the job sector, about 200,000 jobs in the last quarter of last year. But the problem is that those 200,000 jobs do not compensate for the number of jobs that are being lost. There is officially 10% unemployment in the US. But if you take into account the people who dropped out of the workforce, it's something like 20%. And in parts of the US now, there is the situation that existed at the time of the 1930s, where there was, if you like, depression. So there's no real hope that the US can act as the locomotive that it did in the past. Can the BRICS, the so-called BRICS, China, India, and so on, Brazil, can they show a way out? Well, Brazil's growth, we just had a comrade who's come back from Brazil. Brazil's growth is quite spectacular, and it's a very good thing. It's led to a strike wave in Brazil, where the workers who've got jobs say, well, we lost a lot in the previous cycle, now we're going to demand our share because of the increased profits of the Brazilian ruling class. But that is based largely on the supply of commodities to the growing markets of China. Now we face the situation in the last couple of days, last couple of weeks rather, where the expectations in China, which has had a turbocharged growth, has gone along with something like 10% a year, now for more than a decade. Now we have the first signs of a slowdown in China, with a possible drop of something like 4%. And if it drops by 4%, look at what's happened in the Guangdong province of China in the last couple of weeks. And a whole village rose and drove the Communist Party out. For the first time, it was in opposition to the so-called Communist Party. We're on the eve of a revolution in China. And I say that, by the way, we were the only ones who said before the event, before what happened in Egypt, that Egypt was on the precipice of a revolution. Read what we wrote in our documents for the World Congress of 2010, with the way that we described this situation itself. We are on the verge of revolution, and yet, if you take the consciousness of the working class, Apart from the advanced layer, gathered here and elsewhere, there is not a consciousness of that on the part of working people. Why? It's because of the last 20 years where capitalism has gone ahead, because of the retreat of the Labour Party from a workers' party into another capitalist formation. I mean, when Miliband comes forward with the idea of a responsible capitalism, there's no such a thing. As one correspondent to our paper said, yeah, responsible for massive employment, bad housing, bad education, and so on. That's the reality. The idea of looking for a new capitalism without posing the question point blank of changing the system is an indication of that. In a way, working people are raiding the storerooms of history. They're going back. It's like a child when he's playing about 2 or 3 or 4 and goes into his mother's closet and tries on the dress, and if it doesn't fit, or tries on high heels and he falls off. That's the women I'm talking about. Tries on high heels and falls off. People are experimenting with ideas. The new generation is looking for the magic wand, the magic solution to this situation. For instance, there are people in Britain now who still think, well, this is a blip. We'll go back to the sunny economic uplands a little bit later on. We'll go through the agony, and then everything will be all right. Everything will be for the best, in the best of all possible worlds. And I repeat, if there's a certain growth, we welcome that because it would strengthen the working class, heal the wounds, if you like, of the slump, but it ain't going to happen. And the outline of what is likely to take place worldwide, and especially in Europe, is there developing in Greece. Leon Trotsky, in 1930, in a situation very much like this today, except, of course, the workers had viable organisations in the Labour Party, the Communist Party, the Independent Labour Party, and so on, and the trade unions. And that particular stage, Trotsky said, the position in Britain was objectively pre-revolutionary. By the way, a situation very similar to today, maybe without the safety net that still to some extent exists at the present time. And he said it's objectively pre-revolutionary. Why did he say that? Because there's no way forward, really viable way forward, on the basis of capitalism. And therefore, he said, but the problem is, to go from an objective factor to a real pre-revolutionary situation needs a psychological change in the outlook of the masses. And that means they must seek a solution, not on the basis of the old society, not on the basis of the parties of the old society, but on new formations that is offering the way forward. And that, by the way, is the situation in outline that is now developing in Greece. The ruling party of Greece, only a couple of months ago, PASOK, which developed as a revolutionary party, by the way, in the latest opinion polls, has only 8% support in the opinion polls at the moment. On the other hand, Syriza, a new party, the Communist Party and the anti-capitalist left stand at 31% in the opinion polls. That means that the Greek masses, or a significant section of them, are coming to the conclusion there's no way forward on the basis of this system. And what needs to be done in Greece is this general strike, today and tomorrow. It should lead not to another general strike. We've lost count of the general strikes that have taken place. This is the second 48-hour general strike in a week. We should be in favour of an unlimited general strike and the occupation of the factories. And on television last night it was revealed that 20 of the local authorities have been occupied. That's moving in the direction of a break with the situation. That's what we have to look towards. That hasn't dropped from the sky. That's been a product of the insoluble problems of capitalism and an inability to show a way out. And that means a revolutionary leadership. That poses the question of a revolutionary party. It doesn't exist in Greece at the present time. But we're reaching the stage, in the developments in Europe, in Spain, in Britain and so on, the Occupy movement reflected this, of an enormous challenge to the system, but outside the normal parameters of where the working class and the youth go. That's the trade unions, the political parties and so on. In my opinion, the Occupy movement was very significant as a symptom of the way people were developed. For instance, in the USA, in Greece, in Spain, the Occupy movement had a big effect. It had leaders who were opposed to parties. And in one instance, one of our comrades in Greece went on to a demonstration to sell papers. And other Marxists, by the way, were hiding their position. But a huge banner, it said opportunistic, a huge banner with an arrow pointing like this, and they marched up to him and held this over him, because he was trying to sell papers and trying to intervene from a political point of view. So the Occupy movement knows what it doesn't want. It doesn't want capitalism, it's searching for an alternative. The slogan they've come forward of 99%, it's a bit bold, but it nevertheless is accurate. I've got figures here to show that in America, there's 1,200 billionaires who hold the economic firepower equivalent to 1/3 of the size of the American economy. What would the Greek workers chanting on the streets yesterday? Down with the plutocracy, who are in hock with foreign capital. In other words, there is a consciousness now of a small group that holds the destiny of society in their hands. Of course, it's confused. It didn't really take off in Britain. But if the trade union leaders continue to act, the right-wing trade union leaders continue to act, like, for instance, in unison at the present time, where they're selling out the pension struggle. Fortunately, the PCS and the teachers are continuing the battle, and now the FPU have joined in. Then on the basis of the right-wing trade union leaders acting as a bloc, particularly of young people who are unemployed and have no stake in society, not given a stake in society, movements of this character will develop, and we have to intervene in the situation and try and win them to the position of our organisation. But it's not just in Europe that this is happening. It's also happening in America, and it's happening in the neo-colonial world. I don't have time to deal with it. But the presidential elections in America next year is a very important development. You have the position now with Obama, with the level of unemployment that exists in America. No president has won from that position, has won since 1945. I think Obama will break the trend because of the lunatics that he has opposing him in the Republican Party. I don't need to say any more than that. That's enough. That's a scarecrow to scare people to go into the ranks of Obama himself. And by the way, this is against the background of unspeakable poverty in the USA, where, for instance, 1 in 2 in the population are either poor, unemployed, feel economically rejected, and so on. And it's not just in the inner city areas where poverty exists now. It's in the suburbs. The suburbs were always the escape route for the working class from the horrors of the inner city areas themselves. It's not just in the US. It's also in the Middle East, as the comrades are aware. In Egypt and Tunisia, where the revolution still powerfully resonates. 12,000 people have been killed in Egypt. We saw the horrors of the other day of the football match, in which there was a deliberate provocation. But even if there wasn't deliberate provocation by the military, such is the suspicion of the military, they would be blamed for it anyway. And that's what's happened, if you like, because of this football match itself. It's an incomplete revolution in the Middle East at the present time. The independent role of the masses is absolutely necessary to create a mass party, to create independent trade unions, in order for that movement to go forward. I was reading the other day what Lenin was saying about the Russian Revolution. And when he arrived back in February, he said, Russia is the freest country in the world. You couldn't say that really about Egypt at the present time, because of the military still remains intact. Despite the elections, they hold the power. They have 40% stake in the economy, but nevertheless it was a revolution. And the need is now for a second revolution, as the youth is demanding at the present time. We saw the way that reaction, in the form of imperialism, has tried to intervene to derail the Arab Revolution. Shamefully, there were some Marxists who supported the bombing of Libya. We didn't. We're opposed to Gaddafi. We're opposed to imperialism. We opposed imperialism intervening in Libya because it gave them a foothold in Libya in order then to carry through the revolution, but to carry through the counter-revolution. And what is the reality now? An absolute chaos in Libya. The same, by the way, in relation to Syria. I mean, it's a tragedy what's happening in Syria, of the massacres on both sides. It's a sectarian imbroglio now, to be absolutely frank about it. If the rebels won, it would become a Shia state. If the present regime maintains its position, it's based upon a minority. We cannot support either side, if you like, in this. We can be in defence of the people who are being bombed and so on. But again, we have to come out for an independent party of the working class. Syria is linked to the mullahs in Iran, to the position in the Lebanon, and so on. It's not a simple question. It's not yet at the tipping point where the Syrian regime will be overthrown. And quite apart from that, we now have the war drums, the tom-toms are once more being played in the Middle East with the prospect of a war, if you like, because of the bomb of Israel attacking Iran, because of the general position there that exists. It's not just there neither. It's in Nigeria, where we've seen a tremendous general strike in the last period. And not just a general strike of the working class in the cities, but also of a rural movement as well, more like the kind of Hartal type movement that we've seen taking place in India and Sri Lanka in the last period itself. Clearly, comrades, world capitalism is in turmoil. There's never been a better opportunity for an alternative to be put forward. If you look at capitalism, capitalism does not seem to be able to go forward in the modern epoch without a rate of growth of about 3%. And that's, by the way, at a compound rate of growth of 3%. There's no one of the major industrial countries that's doing that, with the exception of Germany at the present time. But unemployment has gone down. But that is not going to last, because it's linked to the general economic situation in Europe as a whole. If one accepts this scenario, how are working people going to react to this? If we weren't here, there would be revolts on the pattern that we see in Greece at the present time. Look at the position in Ireland, not far from here. Nothing seemed to happen, although the economy collapsed. The working class appeared to be paralysed. The trade union leaders were holding the working class back. Now the government has introduced a household tax, and it's produced a storm where there's mass meetings taking place all over Ireland, and our comrades in Ireland are in the vanguard of that movement, and we were able to grow on the basis of that and other movements that are taking place. Capitalism is facing a death agony. It will be a drawn-out death agony. It will not be one simple act. And working people, and the youth in particular, will have a very simple choice of accommodating to this position. And a few of them might get by, but the overwhelming majority will not be able to. Human beings have two choices, generally speaking, in a crisis: of fight or flight. Some of them will flee. In Portugal, for instance, because of the crisis there's huge numbers of the youth who are going back to the former colonies, who are going back to Mozambique and Angola, or going to Brazil. The same in relation to Spain, the same in relation to Greece, maybe Canada and so on. But the world is not big enough for people to flee from the Holocaust, the social Holocaust that is being posed. And that is why, on the basis of this analysis, on the basis of events, we have to build a party. And we'll have big opportunities to do so. When the youth say, look, we're opposed to a party, they've all let us down. I give you the example of Chile in the last period. Absolutely massive movements have taken place. It's an earthquake, as a matter of fact, that's taken place in Chile. In Puentes Arenas, in the far south, over the increase in gas prices, and given the cold weather all year round, a bit like this, except it's throughout the whole of the year, this resulted in the local population in this particular town taking over the running of the town. A popular assembly was formed and the local mayor was thrown out of office. It had many of the features of the Chilean movement in the past. 1 million people demonstrated. Out of a total population, this is in the south by the way, out of a total population of 16 million. 1 in 16 of the population demonstrated as a result of this position. And the youth who were absolutely opposed to politics, down with parties, down with politics. We've been disappointed in all of these parties. It's very interesting what happened. They said, the government, they said, could not be formed because of the law. The youth responded and said, change the law. The government replied, the political system does not allow it. The students replied, we don't trust the political system, we want to change it. And then they went on, and further, there's an anti-party movement that was pronounced. When asked their alternative to a party that changes society, they responded, "We don't know, but we need one." More recently, a minority of the students have begun to say, "For us adopting an anti-party position, what does it result in?" We adopted an anti-party position in Spain, and the right-wing PP came to power. Is that the consequence of this? In other words, this anti-party mood will not last. We have to be patient. We will argue with the youth, we will discuss with them and so on, but we'll convince them, in theory and in practice, of the need for a party, but a party of a new type. A party which leaders are prepared to go to the end in a struggle against capitalism, that is democratic, that tries to encompass all the talents that exist amongst working people and the youth. And on that basis, we will build a powerful force that can begin the task of changing society. To young people today, in order to be as effective as I think young people can be, you need to think that you have a particle of history on your shoulders. You can make history. A minority can become a majority on the basis, not arbitrarily, outside of the objective position, but on the basis of change. You can become a powerful force, a lever for the working class to change society. And that's our goal. We have to go for it. A new exciting period is opening up of struggle, of socialism and of solidarity. Thank you.